Good afternoon. This is a very exciting afternoon, and I'm terribly sorry that some people in Houghton are missing it. But it is quite a thrill to have our Houghton friends with us, because we've been working with this team from Houghton. Well, I think it's over a year now that we've been working together on heritage issues. So it's a special afternoon in those terms, that it's a togetherness of heritage people who really are interested and keen. I can't introduce anybody at great length, because I know they're very worried that otherwise, if I talk too much, they won't have enough time to show all the slides. So I'm going to just introduce you first and foremost to Diane Levine, who's done an enormous amount of work preparing for this, but also, in fact, the extensive research on the heritage buildings. She is helped by another team, but a much smaller team, but I can see Colin and Mel are there, which is lovely to see them. Welcome, both of you. And in doing this, I think it's been a discovery for her. I don't think she'd realized how much her neighborhood had to offer. She was aware of some things, obviously, but other things came as a big surprise. And it actually is one of the great joys of doing research. You do stumble on the most exciting things. So we're going to start with Diane, and then we'll be going on to the other presenters, and we'll try not to break into their times. But welcome, especially to all the Houghton people. It's lovely to have you with us today. Diane, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending this presentation. Now, Houghton is a suburb in the midst of a quiet revolution. This was once made of properties with large homes, tennis courts, swimming pools, and historic gracious homes. The area is now subject to the pressures of densification and urban development, which is fundamentally changing the nature of the suburb. So members of the Lower Houghton Ratepayers Association have attempted to undertake a factual analysis of the current status of the suburb, and even try and get a glimpse into the future. And I would be bold enough to call us citizen scientists. We're not professional experts who have analyzed the data, the residents, the objections to the changes, and the current state of the trees that form a vital part of the ambience of the area. I'm going to start by giving a brief history of Houghton, and we're going to then ask Colin Wasserveld, who's going to represent and show you some of the issues facing conservation. And then Wendy has done the most remarkable research on our trees. So in terms of our history, first, my thanks to Kathy Munro for generously sharing her vast knowledge on the history of Houghton. And sharing, you will see some really interesting early pictures. Now, Houghton was proclaimed in 1902 on property owned by JCI, the mining company. Now, this company was founded in 1889 by the mining entrepreneur Barney Bonato. Now, smart and savvy as he looks there, Bonato foresaw the value of property in the Johannesburg area, and the company purchased the entire Houghton estate. And astoundingly, if you would like to buy a property or subdivide a property in Houghton, you have still got to pay Jonik about 40,000 Rand. And here you can see the magnificent JCI building, which is still standing today. Now, Lower Houghton was opened up for development when Munro Drive was constructed in 1919, about 100 years ago. So Munro Drive, in essence, created a split suburb, Upper and Lower Houghton. And Lower Houghton was built in the interwar period. So here you can see an advert for the property on sale. And these are rather quaint and look very cheap, but in fact they were very expensive at the time. Let's have a glance at the map of Houghton, and you will see it is in fact a large area. Now, from the start, JCI designed the suburb for the idea of serving the wealthy. It's got unusually large stands with wide open boulevard streets lined with magnificent trees. Now, the houses obviously were large, many double-story, and they were architect designs. And they make a statement about the owners that they have arrived. So here we can see a stunning home. And we'll also have a look that this home, standing today clearly, has got all the parts that were essential for your Houghton home. And here we will see the tennis court and the swimming pool, huge swimming pool, which was the fashion in those days. The homes also had delightful special features, such as the staircase in the next slide. Now, Houghton, here you can see this beautiful alcove and the marble stairs. Now, Houghton's development was very dependent on the widespread availability of automobiles. So in order to buy a stand in Houghton, there was no transport. You have to own a car, you have to have a garage, and you have to really be in part of the newly rich. Now, what were the other facilities that attracted people to the area at that time? Okay, there are 2 golf courts in the area and the Wilds, which was donated by JCI in 1939. Other facilities were the well-known schools, and here you can see a lovely picture of these historic buildings, King Edward and St. John's. So that also, and of course there were the local schools, which were at those times of a very high standard, Houghton Primary, Parktown, they were all close by. Now, let's have a look. Who were the early residents? The newly rich businessmen, entrepreneurs, and many professionals who had established themselves in Johannesburg. They were now upwardly mobile, and they now had made it. The style of these homes was eclectic, as you will see from some of our homes that have been awarded blue plaques. They were Cape Dutch style, Art Deco, arts and crafts, Mediterranean, and prominent examples of the modernist style. And some of the architects who were important during that period were Gordon Leith, Houghton and Stewart, Cook and Cowan, Harold Royth, Izzy Wayborn, just to give you, and here you can see, this was just to give you an idea of what these homes looked like. Isn't this magnificent? And who was the first owner of this home? It was none other than the first mayor of Johannesburg, it was owned by James and Ethel Gray. The house is now called Morgana, and it's a marvelous example of Edwardian arts and crafts style. And it was designed in 1928 by Walter and Cyril Reed. Now, I want to thank Melody for these lovely photographs. She's done a wonderful job of reproducing these masterpieces. Another home that I'd like to show you was built for Justice Olive Schreiner, who was a judge in the appeal division of the Supreme Court of South Africa. And Justice Olive Schreiner was the nephew of the very famous Olive Schreiner. And here you can see that this house is named after Lyndall, who was the protagonist in the famous novel, The Story of an African Farm. So here we can see what we're talking about when we're talking about why we want to preserve these homes. Let's have a look at our next our next home. And here you can see this was the home of a Dr. Polanski, who was a renowned orthopedic surgeon. Wonderful example of a home in perfect condition. Now, Houghton was historically known for being a Jewish area. And the reason is that they have a very large synagogue nearby in Killarney, Oxford Synagogue, and a small shul on West Street. And many of those early Jewish residents included the top lawyers and medical specialists of the time. And these included Helen Suzman, who was the founder of the Progressive Party, and the eminent Judge Simon Cooper, who was shot at his window, a very famous or infamous case. Now, this home here served as the Lady Duncan Auxiliary Hospital during World War II. And the renowned plastic surgeon, Jack Penn, operated here on soldiers who had been were disfigured during the war. And another famous person, the actress Dame Janet Suzman, grew up in this house. So here we're seeing a combination of fabulous homes and very distinguished personalities. And in addition to all of these people, we can also look at who were two of our most famous residents. And of course, the one we can't talk about Houghton without remembering Helen Suzman. There you see her as a young woman, and there you see her on the book that she wrote. Now, she was the anti-apartheid activist and politician. For many years, she was the only representative of liberal and center-left opposition parties during her 36-year tenure in the whites-only House of Assembly of South Africa. And this was during the height of the apartheid era. Now, who is the most famous resident? And here we see him. And it is, of course, Mandela. Now, Mandela died in Houghton. Did he die in hospital? But that was his home. And he died in December 2013, and this became a site of remembrance in the immediate aftermath of his death. Now, unfortunately, that home is a part of a dispute, a family dispute, but what we can show you on our next slide is the Mandela Hotel. Now, this was the first house he lived in, and they have restored it. You can see there, very modern features on the side, but you can go now and stay in this magnificent boutique hotel that combines the old and the new. Now let's move on to the new residence. That is the history. Let's look at the present. Now, a number of changes brought about the gradual changes in the suburb and the subsequent threat to Houghton as a heritage area. Now, it could be said that the destruction of the old Houghton really started in the 1960s with a motorway that came through the middle of Houghton. And obviously, if we're talking about these homes built in the mid-war period, those original residents brought up their families and then moved away. And with the demise of apartheid in 1994, Houghton started to become repopulated and reflected the diversity of Bishop Tutu's Rainbow Nation. It has become a popular destination for Muslims, and with the construction of 2 magnificent mosques in the area. We have one in the east of the suburb, and this beautiful building, which is visible from the M1 freeway, and this was completed in 2013 after a lot of delays. So we see a fascinating change as the suburb that had been predominantly Jewish slowly changed to adapt to the current South African realities. And one of the most important factors in the change of the society of Houghton is the older style of architecture was no longer seen as desirable. And the new buyers, understandably, what did they want? They wanted the most modern, they wanted contemporary homes, the best fixtures, they were going to spend a lot of money, and many of them wanted to keep the old lavish gardens, but probably more wanted a smaller home, subdivided, where they had security. And so security and the desire to cut down on huge maintenance cost has been a very big factor in the change of the suburb. And in fact, when you think about it today, is that how many people are going to start off and saying the priority for them is they want a tennis court? Not many people are going to start off with that on their wish list. So now we can see that other factors have also played a part. The one is business development from Rosebank, which has been extended into Houghton, so that the inner core is slowly being eroded. The other significant development, which has been very important, has been the nodal review process, which approved the policy of densification for the core of the city. This redevelopment was sanctioned by the City of Johannesburg's Regional Spatial Development Framework, and that was passed into legislation in 2020. Now, what was the motivation behind this? The City Council observed that in the middle we see beautiful spacious suburbs, while the high density areas such as Soweto were located on the outskirts, far from business hubs, far from transport and job opportunities. The city seeks to reverse this trend by opening up Johannesburg's prime areas to high density development. And again, let me quote a city document. The idea of proximity to places of work and schools, easy access to public transport, infrastructure, and other services. Now, many Houghton residents have no idea of the implications of this act because they are now allowed to build a minimum of 60 units on a stand that previously held one home. Now, understandably, the people of Houghton are not very keen on multi-cluster high-rise developments next to their homes with their own privacy intruded upon. So the idea was to open Johannesburg's wealthy suburbs to poor residents. However, no such thing has happened for poorer people. There is no low-cost, affordable housing in Houghton. What has happened is that this nodal review has opened a world of opportunity for developers. So this has resulted in rapid redevelopment as developers see that there is significant profit in demolishing old homes and rebuilding cluster homes. However, of course, no new schools have been built. Infrastructure has been degraded, our power outages, our water shortages. So we find a dilemma that heritage is often in conflict with the process of densification and redevelopment. Now, I'm going to do a little glance at what I've called a few slides that I'm discussing as money makes the world go round. And we're going to have a look at what is happening with three stakeholders: the residents, the buyers, and the developers. So let's have a look at the buyers first. Now, the buyers find it's often very difficult to sell a house. And the reason is, as I've outlined, the bathrooms are in the wrong place. The kitchens are not up to date. The style might not be appealing. And here I've shown you what does it cost to buy a house in Houghton. And I've got two lists here: what properties were sold in 2019 and what was sold in 2020. And I can gather from this that the houses that have not been rebuilt or redeveloped will sell for approximately 6.5 to 8 million rand. So I reckon that's more or less the land value for those residents who want to know about such a matter. And obviously there are some that are much more expensive, but these must have been redeveloped in the past. Okay, now I want to have a look at what profits can be made for developers. And let's have a look at the next slide. And here you will get an idea exactly what is happening. So the first one on your left is opposite Old Eds. So we can assume that at that particular property, maybe 7 million was paid for the land. But to buy one of those 8 units, you're going to have to pay 6.5 million. And that is going to clear, say, about 52 million. That's before costs, to be fair to the developer. And I'm sure there's a good profit in that. And then you will have a look at 22 cluster homes that is being advertised on 11th Avenue. And here, for one of these small units, you are going to have to pay 4.4 million, and it's going to bring in for the developer, say, approximately 97 million. So we cannot ignore the financial realities. And I would predict that we will see a lot more of this sort of development taking place. And can we look at one of the homes or one of the clusters that residents have not really. Okay, now this is a development. This is the one I told you about on 11th Street with the 22 clusters. And what just breaks my heart is you can see that everything has been flattened and the poor few remaining trees, even though they were on the outskirts of the property, there is no room for them in a cluster development, it seems, and that is really a tragedy. Now, this is an example of these units that I'm talking about, the residence, which is also on the corner of 11th. And and from what records I do have, it has more than 12 units, but so far those units have brought in for the developer about 53 million in property that has been sold. I believe quite a number of them are not selling, and it seems to me they're very expensive. They're on a road with a lot of traffic, but that's obviously everybody's choice, and many people want to live in the suburb of Houghton. So I thought it was important, if we're going to talk about heritage, that we acknowledge the financial situation. Now, with that, and I'm sure we'll open up to questions later on, I'm going to ask Colin Wasserval to continue, and he will give you additional information with some further research that's been undertaken on Houghton. So Colin, over to you. Colin? While we wait, I will mention that I'm going to conclude our presentation by telling you a little bit about what is left of the historic homes. But in the meantime, if Colin can continue.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Di. You've done a wonderful job leading the heritage portfolio at the Residents Association. Thank you very much for your passion and dedication. Okay, so in 2019, Professor Munro, Kathy Munro, handed over a printed survey that was done in 1991 by some students from the Technikon. So my wife, Mel, digitized that survey. We put it into an Excel spreadsheet. Now, the information on that survey was the year that the house was built, the architect that designed the house, and the earth number and the address of the houses. So Mel went through with the current information and cross-referenced the information from the 1991 survey with the current information. She used Google Earth, Google Street View, and she was able to determine which houses still exist from 1991 until 2020. If we can go to the first slide, please, Stephen. So this is the result of that survey. Every earth in Lower Houghton is represented on this map. And they've been categorized in blue. Blue means all the urban that have got homes that are still in the original condition from the 1991 survey. The light blue are houses which still exist, but they may have been altered in some way. And then the yellow brown are urban that were subdivided, which means the original houses from 1991 were demolished, and the red represents all the urban that had houses demolished. So it's just a couple of things I want to point out. If you look at Lower Houghton, we've got 2 golf courses and 1 quite large sport club. So, and we've got a 6-lane motorway running through the middle of the suburb. So what this means is when the town planners at the city do an analysis of Lower Houghton, they see that we've got a very low population density. So they don't remove the golf courses and the sport club, that area, they don't remove that from the calculation. So it looks like we're very sparsely populated, but the reality is we're not really. Yeah. Can we have the next slide, Stephen? Okay, so just to divide everything out, these are the original urban with original houses that are remaining in Houghton Estate. So these guys are most likely in the original state from when they were first built. It looks like there's quite a few remaining. Can we do the next slide, Stephen? So these are the altered houses on the urban. It's also well spread out. Like I said, these urban, the buildings on there have been altered in some way, either by having an additional building like a garage added or their roofs changed, but otherwise they should be original. We have to do a grading as a residents association to see the quality of these buildings that are left. And the next slide, please, Stephen. So these are the subdivided and demolished houses. Yeah, all over the place. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Stephen. The next slide. So this is the serious one. If you look on the top left corner along Oxford Road, so that is turned into a high density development zone. There's encroachment from the Rosebank metropolitan area. So we've got Coca-Cola, big companies that have moved in there towards the north. And as you go south, we've got high density residential developments taking place along Glenhove. So the funny thing about Lower Houghton is that everything, the first line of urban south of Glenhove are part of Melrose. If you look along Central Streets to the west, there's also been a lot of demolition there. A lot of homes were destroyed to make way for either commercial or offices there. So that's like our commercial street there. There are some houses there that are being used as offices. And if you can look at the Houghton Golf Club, that big red splotch there is the Houghton that was developed since 1991. And First Avenue is also, well, along with 11th and First Avenue is turning into a bit of a building site as well. So can we have the next slide, please, Stephen? Right, and this is together. This is what represents the loss that Houghton has suffered. All these urban have got demolished houses in them in the last 30 years. So it seems quite bad, but yeah. Okay, so the next image slide, please, Stephen. So this is what's left. In 30 years, this is what has remained of Houghton. Yeah. So there's still quite a bit there. It's not too bad. And the next slide, please, Stephen. So this is a problem from a social and security perspective. These purple urban are either empty stands or houses that have been purchased and then left open for vagrants to move in. So you can imagine if you're living next door to one of these stands, you're not going to be a very happy Houghton resident. In most cases, the water and the power is cut off, which means there's no ablutions, there's no sewage, no services for these stands. And I have to point out that the owners of most of these stands know that people have moved in there. And they seem to condone it. And the next slide, please, Stephen. So this is a pie chart of the information that was on the first slides. So the original and altered houses, you can see we've quote unquote lost nearly 50% of the houses in Houghton since 1991. But there's a caveat to that. Could we have the next slide, please, Stephen? So in 1991, there were more or less 800 stands in Houghton Estate. So in the 30 years since then, we've had an increase of 50% of urban in Houghton Estate. So now we've got just over 1,200 stands in Houghton Estate. So our increase in density over 30 years is, we can say, about 50%. So we've doubled. No, we've had a 50% increase. We've added 30%. You can see the demolished houses, just about 200. And the next slide, please, Stephen. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a bit about the planning and development portfolio of the Lower Houghton Residents Association. We've got a team led by Carolyn Douglas, which looks at all the applications for Houghton Estate. And we're given an opportunity to object to every application. And Carolyn puts together a template which is sent out to all the residents in Houghton Estate, and they submit their objections to the city, the objections against these applications. So since 2017, Carolyn made a list. Since 2017, Planning and Development has dealt with 26 applications, 4 for offices and 1 application for development. So I think some of these offices are on Glenhove Road. So their neighbors would be Lower Houghton residents. That's why we objected on their behalf. The next slide, please, Stephen. So what were the numbers? Hang on 1 second. I just want to check something. So the application for, there were 4 applications for 3 or 4 subdivisions. So now this is the kind of subdivisions we like in Houghton Estate. It's in line with our neighbors in Saxonwold and Melrose. So if you take a 4,000 square meter and you divide it into 4, you get about 1,000 square meters for each house, which is, we think is okay. It's not as bad as what's coming up. The next slide, please, Stephen. So this is what most people don't like. As a residents association, we believe 8 units per acre it's a bit too much. And you can see from those pictures that Di showed us, the developments tend to be not very attractive and more factory-like. And that seems to be what people want the most, or at least the developers want to build units, 8 units on an acre. The next slide, please, Stephen. So we did have 6 applications for 34 units per acre, which is really insane. This is mainly in the northwestern corner of Lower Houghton. It's tiny units. It's a 3 or 4 stories block of flats, basically, which is, it doesn't fit with Houghton Estate at all. So we're not too happy about those. The next slide, please, Stephen. And we have had 2 applications for 117 units per acre. The most recent one is on the corner of 5th Street and 11th Avenue. They started out wanting, I think it was 18, and now they've applied for this insane density. Oh, so that's what we deal with as the LHRA. Stephen, I think that's the last slide. Yeah, so that's me. I'd just like to introduce Wendy van der Merwe. She heads our environmental portfolio. She's really done amazing work, her and her team, which you're going to hear about next. All yours, Wendy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Di. Yes, I'm Wendy van der Merwe, and really I'd just like to introduce myself as a deeply concerned resident as I see the eradication of Johannesburg urban forest due to densification and the polyphagous shot-hole borer. So I really can't imagine myself personally living in Johannesburg with no trees. And so with my background in science, I put my hand up to work with some other concerned residents into investigating how we could, or what we could do in our suburb in the midst of this crisis. And most notably, Glenda Wheeler, who is a management consultant, who did a lot of work in investigating or researching the management of PSHB in South Africa and encouraging the working together of various stakeholders in the private sector and the government sector. She'll also be available on this call to answer any questions that I can't answer a little bit later. So before I go into the work that we've done in Houghton, I just want to explain what PSHB is, or polyphagous shot-hole borer is, to any of those listeners out there today who may not have heard about it. Well, first, okay, what is PSHB? Well, the polyphagous shot-hole borer is an ambrosia beetle that is native to Southeast Asia. And basically it is ambrosia, meaning that it is associated, or it has a symbiotic relationship with the ambrosia fungus. And the female beetle is about 2 millimeters long, and it carries the fungal spores on its body. It makes holes in the bark of a tree, which are about 1 millimeter in diameter. And then it creates tunnels in the cambium, or the interior of the tree, which become lined with this fungus, which is obviously feeds the beetles and the larvae, but it is a pathogen to the trees. So the trees, what they do is they try and inoculate themselves against this fungus by creating dead wood around the tunnels. And of course, this has a detrimental effect on the transport of sap, of food and water in the vascular system of the plant or of the tree, so that the branches and the branches don't transport any food or sap to the leaves, and ultimately the tree shows visible dieback, as you can see in that picture, and in the worst case the tree will die. So that is why PSHB is a danger to trees. Well, where does it come from? Well, like I said, it was native to Southeast Asia, and it is believed to have come to South Africa in infested wood crates. It was first seen in the National Botanical Garden in Pietermaritzburg in 2017 in London plane trees. And since then, it has unfortunately been found in multiple locations in all of the provinces of South Africa, in all of the 8 of 9 provinces, except for Limpopo. So this is a map that has been published by FABI, that's the Forestry and Biodiversity Institute, the University of Pretoria. And this is the latest information as of March 2021. So they say that the infestation is mainly visible in the urban forests and in urban trees, in other words, in our public trees, street trees and gardens. But fortunately, it hasn't yet, there's no wide infestation in the agricultural or the native or commercial forests. But this could change if the transport of infested wood is not managed. Right, so what trees are infested by PSHB? Well, PSHB attacks a variety of indigenous and exotic trees, but fortunately it's not able to complete its life cycle in all of the tree species that it attacks. So basically there are 3 categories of trees depending on the degree of infestation. And the first category is the most harshly affected type of tree, and these are called reproductive host trees because the beetles are able to complete their life cycle in the tree. They create those breeding tunnels or those breeding colonies that I showed you in the first slide. And of course, this is detrimental to the tree. Most of these reproductive host trees do eventually die. And the most common of these are the English oak, the Chinese maple, the Japanese maple, the box elder, and the sweet gum. Then you get reproductive host trees. So the beetles like these trees, they attack these trees, but they do not form breeding colonies in these trees. So fortunately, these trees do not always die, but this does depend on a number of factors, such as whether the tree is stressed or not, planted on a pavement with bricks all around it or concrete all around it and not watered or cared for, or obviously, and also say an old tree is not likely to survive. And then you have trees which are not infested. These are all the trees that are not on these 2 lists that are published by FABI. And scientists don't know exactly why the beetles don't attack some trees. Perhaps they've got some sort of innate resistance to the beetle. The beetle doesn't like it. We don't know yet. Right, PSHB impact in Houghton estate. Is it real? Well, this is an example of how a once beautiful English oak tree has rapidly deteriorated due to PSHB infestation. So it was prolific in August 2016, but then by August 2019, you can see there that it shows a lot of visible dieback. In September 2019, a concerned resident took it upon himself to cut back the tree and treat it with a fungicide and insecticide. But unfortunately, this didn't work, and today it is dead. So PSHB is definitely has an impact on our trees in Houghton Estate. And so as an RA, we went about seeing what we could do to try and research to how to manage this crisis, or what we could do to educate residents and how to look after private trees, or what we could do with public trees as well. Bearing in mind that public trees are pavement trees, trees in parks are actually the property of city parks, and it is illegal for any resident to cut a public tree or treat a public tree. So in 2019, we held various public awareness workshops and tree care workshops where a local arborist educated residents on how to identify infestation and how to treat it. And the treatment is beyond the scope of this talk. Anybody who's interested, I've got some contacts on the last slide. You're welcome to contact an arborist to come out and look at a tree that you suspect is infested and advise you on what to do. Anyway, we then set about to determine the extent and the nature of the infestation on the public trees by conducting a tree survey. So we conducted an initial tree survey. We got an arborist to do this for us, and they counted the number of infested trees in 11th Avenue, Central and West Street, and 4th Street. So as you can see, 85% of the London plains were infested in 11th Avenue, and 80% of the London plains were infested in Central or West Street. Obviously, the percentage is high there because London plains are readily infested by PSHB. Then there was a low percentage of infestation in 4th Street, only 36%. Those were mainly the English oaks, but there are lots of palm trees in that street, and so that brought down the percentage. Anyway, this was just a public awareness thing. And as you can see, we had those red stickers on the tree, and the whole idea was to call for volunteers to participate in a citizen science project, a tree survey, whereby we trained residents on how to look for infestation. So the objectives of the survey were firstly to conduct a census, to count the number of public trees, and to determine the species of all the public trees. Secondly, it was to identify signs of PSHB infestation, looking for holes, oozing, and frass, as you can see there in those pictures. Really, frass is just sawdust. And the residents were trained by an arborist to do this. And then it was also to identify new tree planting opportunities. This whole project was aligned with City Parks and Zoo. We've had a number of meetings with them, and they were aware of everything that we are doing. We've also shared the data with them since then. It was also aligned with Wits University, FARBI, Pretoria University, who gave input into the data sheet that we used, and arborists who are, like I said, trained us on how to identify. So these are just some pictures of the volunteers who got involved. We had volunteers that were residents, business owners, the CAP Green team you can see there. And then we also had a Wits honors student called Tato Molloy, and he actually did his honors dissertation on this project. So the other great thing about it was that we were able, just as residents, to contribute to science and research into trying to solve this problem and whatever they're doing in the academic sector. Right, so those were our volunteers. And then the results of the survey was that we counted 4,115 public trees on our pavements. And City Parks estimate that for every one public tree, there are 3 private trees in gardens. And so therefore we can estimate that we've got about 12,000 trees in Lower Houghton. But that's obviously gone down even since then with all this rapid development that Dar was showing you in the eradication of trees on all these vacant stands. But anyway, we identified 116 different species. So you may say to me, well, Wendy, that looks like we've got the most incredibly diverse canopy, and the diversity means that, you know, that trees have got a greater chance of surviving against this pest. But that's not the case, because the top 3 species, the London plane, the jacaranda, and the Chinese maple, they contribute to 50% of the total number of trees, and the top 10 species contribute to 75% of the total number of trees. So this means that our suburb is mainly uni-planted. I mean, you can see somewhere like 2nd Avenue, where I live, is mainly jacarandas. So the suburb is mainly uni-planted with the trees that were planted by City Parks about 100 years ago. Many of our trees are reaching the end of their lifespan. 72 species had less than 10 trees assigned to each, and so this is what contributed to the diversity. And these were probably trees that have been planted by residents ad hoc here and there over the years. So what I also wanted to mention is that all of the top 10 species in this wheel get infested by PSHB, except palm, white stinkwood, and conifer. And so this means that the very large old trees that contribute mostly to our canopy are at risk. Right, so sadly, we saw PSHB holes in the trunks of 41% of the total number of trees, and we saw oozing in 19% of the trees. And so that means that at least 41% of our trees are infested with PSHB. But despite these high levels of infestation, you see that 66% of our trees actually looked vigorous. Our trees look relatively healthy. 23% looked like they were ailing. 9% showed visible dieback. Like I showed you in the first slide, when the PSHB starts taking its toll, you start seeing visible dieback, and then 2% were dead. So also as part of this survey, we counted 72 dead trees, English oak, box elder, Chinese maple. Some of those are all, or many of those are reproductive host trees, which would explain why they died. And then we identified 608 tree planting opportunities throughout the suburb. This is just open space or space that has been left open because trees have died and actually been cut down. So this survey provided very valuable information to us because it also allows city parks to project into the future, to plan their nursery, make sure that it's stocked with saplings to replant in the future. And we shared this data with them. But it also stands to tell us that we could lose 41% of our trees should all of them that are infested die. And that would mean that we would lose 1,687 trees. And that would be an absolute tragedy. So like I said, we've had meetings with city parks where we've shared the results of our survey. And their strategy is not to treat infested trees on the pavement with chemicals, because this would just be far too expensive. And these chemicals have not shown or have not proved themselves to be effective. There's still a lot of research into this, and no chemical has actually been approved to be used to treat PSHB. So the solution is to plant a variety of new trees that show resistance to PSHB, and so that we can hopefully replant and ensure that we have a healthy tree canopy in the future. So the vision of LHRA is to ensure a leafy tree-lined Houghton estate for another 100 years. And so you may just look at me and say, well, Wendy, that just sounds far too idealistic. And perhaps it is, given our challenges that we face with the municipality and with COVID. But we can only remain optimistic. And if we can get good resident participation, like we did with our survey, we can get into looking after newly planted trees on their pavements and get the relevant permission from the municipality and city parks, it is definitely achievable. So the action plan is to remove the 72 dead trees. City Parks has this list, they're aware of this. They're doing it on a piecemeal basis. Fortunately, their large trucks have not been serviced since last year. And the new service provider is currently being tendered for. So these are some of the challenges, like I said, that we face. We have applied for a way leave within City Parks, and we are waiting for approval from that. And then the next step is to consult a landscaping architect to advise us what trees to plant, considering the PSHB resistance and the size of the tree. We're looking at white stinkwoods. They're large tree canopy. They grow quickly. They're PSHB resistance, and those would be suitable for pavements, large pavements. And then there are a number of other smaller trees which I've listed over here. I won't read them out, but you can have a look in your own time, that we've chosen based upon the trees which are already in the streets and the ambiance or the character that we wish to create. Right, and then of course the last thing is, like I said, is to encourage residents' participation to look after the newly planted trees, fertilize them, and water them for the first 3 years to ensure viable tree health. Right, so that's just a little summary of what we've done in Houghton over the last year and a half or so. And we hope to encourage anybody who's listening today to plant a tree, even if it's in your own garden. And this last slide that I've got here just gives you some valuable context, useful context that will help you to identify infestation in your own garden and report dead trees, request city parks to plant trees. The more pressure we put on the municipality to plant trees, the better. And so that's it from me. Thank you, Di.
Now, Wendy, that is such impressive work, and I'm sure all of you would just, if you could, clap your hands in appreciation. She has really been such a leader in preservation of our trees. Now, I want to run through a little bit of the ideas of what remains exactly of our heritage homes and how do we try and protect them in the future. All our homes over the age of 60 years are supposed to fall under the protection of the National Heritage Resources Act. Any proposal to alter or demolish a home needs to be submitted, the application needs to be submitted to the Provincial Heritage Resources of Houghton, Prague. However, like many government associations or institutions, the organization functions erratically and cannot be relied on to protect our heritage homes. And demolishing homes just takes place irrespective. So let's have a look carefully at a few of the important architects, and I'll run through this quickly. One of the important architects is Leroyth, and if we can see that slide up, you can see that there is a picture of one of Leroyth's homes, if we can just go back to that, which was awarded a blue plaque. We identified 11 homes that he designed. One has a blue plaque. There is another one that's intact, but the owner has applied to demolish this home. 8 of the 11 have either been demolished or derelict or completely altered. Let's have a look at another prominent architect, Cook and Cowan. And now I know you can't really read all the details, but this survey was done by our residents, Des and Eva Waldman, which gives us an example. This is actually much harder work than you imagine, because you've got to spend quite a lot of time really looking at homes, trying to make notes on them. And I'm going to appeal to residents to get involved in exactly this sort of work. So they identified 26 Cook and Cowan homes. 8 of them are now townhouses, but it appears that a number of these are still in good condition. So we can see an original home. This is the James Cook house that he designed for himself. If we could look at that slide, please. And you can see what a magnificent home. Unfortunately, that no longer exists. I'm going to glance at one more architect, and this is Weyburn. And you can see there that we have got 4 original homes standing and 6 that have been altered in some way, and it seems that none have been demolished. And I'm going to show you 2 pictures of a Weyburn house, and very fortunately, this house is my house, and that I really love and really enjoy living in. And a little last slide for this moment on the interior of the house, and there you see features like the magnificent wooden floors that you will not see in a modern home. So in summary, I want to just add some concluding remarks. Now, despite some of the negative aspects of these changes, it's very important that we appreciate the good. As Colin explained, and as I pointed out, although many historic homes were demolished, there are some still in good condition. And these are often little gems tucked away behind high walls, and it's our job to find them and to see if we can't award these homes blue plaques, and be vigilant that we try and make sure that these homes are saved. But we also need to remember that many of the homes that were demolished were not in good condition. And if it's not for renewal and new residents coming with fresh ideas, a suburb actually deteriorates. So we certainly cannot stand still in the past and try and keep things exactly as they were. That really would not work, and it would not be good for the suburb either. And I also want to add that despite all our complaints about the City Council, it is a marvelous suburb just to stroll around our streets. The streets are kept clean. By and large, the pavements are well kept and well manicured. The residents are proud of their suburb. And it's also a relatively safe area to walk in because, I have to admit it, because there are so many security companies who patrol our streets. And with one last remark, I really get a lot of satisfaction by looking along West Street. And you will see on the left-hand side a very charming little house that belonged to the late Judge Basil Wunsch. And that was now been converted to a really small synagogue. Now, that synagogue sits absolutely next door to the mosque. And what I think we also have to appreciate, that I'm not so sure how many places and countries that we can have a synagogue sitting next to a mosque in great harmony and peace. And it certainly shows that our residents certainly get on well, and there's always a friendly atmosphere when you walk down the street. Everybody says good morning, good afternoon, and I feel it creates a lovely atmosphere and a wonderful suburb to live in. So with those remarks, I'll close, and I'm not sure if we're going to take some questions. Over to you, Stephen.
Well, actually, it's over to me, Di.
Flo. Okay, over to you, Flo.
Over to Flo. No, I'm really so impressed, and I so enjoyed it, and I think that I'm sure that most of the people who are on the call have enjoyed it. But I'd like to start off by giving a space for questions now, because I don't want people to lose sight of the things they did want to ask. And I'm sure there will be some. So if you, Steve, can you unmute everybody? So
yeah, everyone can unmute.
If you want to ask a question, you can unmute now. Okay, Stephanie.
I wanted to find out a little bit more from Wendy on arborists, to get in touch with exactly on that, the English oaks and yeah, that I need to get attended to. It's so coincidental, but yeah, but so if you could just put your details in the chat box, or otherwise if I can get them from Ira next week.
Fine. I will put those names and the numbers on the chat box.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay.
Anyone else?
Yes, Kathy Munro here. Thanks very much, Colin, Di, Mel, and Wendy. That was a super presentation. I do have a question for Di. You showed some houses on new townhouses on 11th, densely packed, enormous numbers now per acre. I wanted to first of all say that I think that was a property that Johannesburg Heritage looked at and commented on with a heritage study maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and we actually recommended and explained how the original house could be kept, and we made some recommendations about keeping trees. None of that had any impact whatsoever, and they simply went ahead to do what you then showed us in that slide today. It was most upsetting. The original house was a Robert Houghton 1935 house that stood there. But as you correctly said, it was a single house, single family, middle of the stand, detached house, large home, difficult today to maintain, and instead it's given way to multi-dwellings. But these are not poor people who then move into the suburb, if that was the intention of our city council. You're right. These new small homes are extremely expensive. Seems to me that the real beneficiaries are the developers, and we've had a massive loss of trees on these private trees on private stands. Thanks.
It's, yes, yeah, Kathy, that's exactly what I wanted to reflect in my presentation, because those are all the factors that have led to the destruction of some of these homes. And I think that one of the difficult things is that we're left with the feeling of powerlessness to intervene. But what I do ask is that if there's anyone who's interested in joining us and attempting to identify these precious homes, please contact us. I can leave my details with Flo. She has them. And unless citizens get involved, you're really going to find suburbs that you really don't want, you know, changes you don't want.
Yeah, okay. I'm afraid people have to be active if they want to save.
Yeah, people want to be, you've got to be active. Yeah.
It's Wendy's message as well that if we want to save our urban forests, we'd better start planting trees.
Yeah.
Because nobody so far, and remember, we're not the first and only ones in the world to suffer from this ghastly beetle. It attacked Israel, it attacked California. They didn't find anything that could stop it. So I'm sure they tried jolly hard. And it doesn't look very likely that we're going to get a solution to preventing it. We'd better start on the alternative of planting, which, as Wendy says, is the best thing to do if we want an urban forest to still to be there in 20 years. Any more questions? Comments? Well, I think that everybody, we've had an absolutely fantastic afternoon, and we really must commend the Lower Houghton Residents Association. That was an absolutely excellent presentation, and what you have found and what you have looked for has been so interesting. I think you were yourself surprised that many more houses have survived than you thought would, because it's very scary when you see them going down. But you do actually have a high survival rate. And definitely, as Diane says, the thing to do is to identify now the really important ones, and make sure that there's a chance for those ones to survive. It isn't absolutely necessary to lose a beautiful old home if you are increasing density. That lovely Leroyth house, the Marks house, is actually part of a cluster development. So it's possible that they can survive. It isn't essential that they be demolished. And we are trying to work on a proposal that the City Council would have to force developers to get a decision first from Prague as to whether the house can be demolished or not. Because what they do at the moment is they go ahead, get their rezoning, and then the argument is that if you want us to keep the house, we really need compensation in the millions because we'd lose so many units. And I think that's an artificial remark. They should have told right in the beginning, they should have been told that the house had to stay. Anyway, thank you very much. It's been a lovely afternoon, and I think that your analysis has been very interesting. And I think that it's wonderful that you are starting to assert the value of the heritage of Houghton. Now, next week we'll be looking at the synagogues of Johannesburg, which of course is another important aspect of our heritage. I know many of them were in small houses, but because we're looking at the architecture, we'll be looking at the ones that were built as synagogues, not the ones that were adapted over the years. We do know there are many that were adapted. And I hope that people will sign up for this. It's going to be on a Sunday because it concerns the Jewish faith. So we expect to see you all there. That'll be lovely. And thank you so much for coming.